How's it going, y'all? So I want to have a little talk about testing in React. And in fact, it's not really a talk. I just want to give an overview of how you can kind of test some stuff out. So the de facto standard of testing is using React testing library. So if you have like a component and you want to verify it does like the things it's supposed to do, one approach to doing that is via automated testing, right? You write a bunch of tests, those tests run over your React components, and those tests verify that your component does indeed. For example, I have a to-do list app. When I type to this input and I click add to do, you can write a test to verify that that same text, maybe I should type in like hello world, not hello world, hello world. Just verify some stuff actually happens, because otherwise you actually need to hire someone to go and click through your UI, or you have to do it yourself manually. And when stuff gets more complicated and the logic is more complex, you're gonna forget about stuff. You're gonna forget about a certain button that you didn't know existed or you didn't think was there because you're logged in as a different user role. And so that flow, that user flow, never gets tested. And that's why we have automated tests. But for this little basic, like, I don't know, it's an input box with a button. How would you actually test this? I think the first thing we want to do is look at the actual code, because it's good to understand like how the code is set up. So this is a to-do list thing. And I've abstracted all the logic away into a use to do's custom hook. This is an approach that a lot of people take, I think, or at least would try to take myself, because it allows you to easily test your hook in isolation if you wanted to. And it also kind of like cleans up your component. Like this just becomes more of like a presentational component here, and all of your logic is abstracted away into a custom hook. So how do I test this component? There's like two main ways you can do it through React testing library. The first one, and I'm going to share with you the first one, is you can write a jest test, and you can actually do like DOM, I don't want to say manipulation, but you can actually check the JS DOM and verify that certain things exist on the page when you run your test. So let me run the test real quick so you kind of are familiar with what I'm doing. I'm going to copy this path. I'm going to say npm run test. Actually, I think I just do npm test. I'm going to put the name of the file here. And that's going to run jest over this file individually. It's going to run these two tests. And it runs in about 50 milliseconds, 55 milliseconds, whatever. But let's kind of look through how this works. And again, kind of emphasize why you do this. So the first test is should allow a user to add a new to-do item. So what this test kind of does is it takes the app component, which if I look at the app component, it's really basic right now. I got some Zustan stuff here I gotta delete. But in fact, I don't even know why I'm doing the app component. Like I could just do the to-do component. All right, I'm gonna change some stuff real quick. I didn't realize this code was kind of bad. This should actually be initializing the to-do component. We can kind of talk about this as we do this. So if the component you want to test is called to-do, then in your test file, you probably want to import that. And inside of your it statements, this is where you write your test to verify that when you actually create a new to-do component, you can verify certain things. So in our case, this test is creating a to-do component, and then it checks to find something on the page that has cost input, right? So there's a couple of ways in React testing library you can find elements on your DOM. One is find by label text. There's like find by test ID. I don't know what the best approach is. Honestly, some people say don't use test IDs because it doesn't actually test what a user would be using. But most users aren't even using ARIA labels either, right? There's only a small percentage of them. So the way this test is written is we look for this ARIA label that has cost input. And in the test, you know what? I should probably call this to-do text. All right, so in the test, we're going to look for to-do test or to-do text. So find the input, and then we can use something called user events to basically do things on the DOM elements, right? So we can say user.type. We can pass as the DOM element we want to send some text to, and then we can send it clean your room. And then the next step is we are going to find the add to-do button. So what we're kind of doing in this test is we are simulating a user loading up the UI, which I just broke. So let me just go ahead and do this. I'm sorry, y'all, this video kind of sucks. I didn't really prepare for it, but you have this UI, right? And we're simulating someone types in clean your room, and then they click on this button. And there's a couple things we need to verify when that happens. We need to verify that we get another to-do list item that shows up here. And then we also need to verify that this text input is cleared out. So going back to the test, when we click on that to-do button, like so, we then check to make sure that we don't have anything on the page. Then we check to make sure that we have some to-dos on the page. And right here, I'm using some regex, so you can actually do like some regex expressions or just regular expressions to find things on the page. So find all by test ID, look back at that component. You'll see we have a data test ID here. So this is one way you can kind of add properties to your components to find them later in the test if you wanted to. And I'm looking for anything that has to-do hyphen in it. This might be brittle. And leave a comment below if you have a better way you can actually like test the right things in your React testing library tests. But basically just get all the to-dos on the page and verify that they're equal to 1, right? So the first test, when you run it, like it passes, and at least it should have passed. Let's see why it's failing now. Okay, the second one's failing because I did change this to like text, to-do text, I believe. I probably changed some other stuff. But yeah, the first test is passing now. That's all awesome. And the reason we do this is because we don't want to have to go and click the UI every single time someone were to change the page. Because you imagine you have a UI that has like 10 different buttons. How do you know these buttons actually do what they're supposed to do, right? So you write tests to verify these things. And the next test I wrote should allow a user to delete a to-do item, right? So it's kind of a duplicative test of this. Like honestly, this is, I think, all the same code. There might be like one little change. Let's see. But anyway, we make a to-do item and then we do the same thing. We type in clean your room. We click on the add to do button. We verify that we get one to do. But the main difference is here where we actually find the button that says delete to do. And then we click it. And then we do a query all by test ID and find that same like to do prefix and verify that it's 0. Okay, so now we're actually verifying that if someone clicks on delete, we check the page and make sure that there's no more items on the page, right? There's 101 ways you can actually change this test up and test it differently. But for the most part, like if you feel confident that the test is actually verifying the functionality, then you're probably good. I would probably clean this up. I don't know. But it's good to have tests that run in isolation. You don't want this one down here to depend on this one for setup. So we could do some setup here and say like before each. And if we wanted to, we could probably do like all of these same steps because they're kind of shared between these two tests. But honestly, I think sometimes you just dry up code too much and it becomes harder to read. So I'd probably just leave it alone. So what's another test we can kind of do? Because I want to do one more test while I got you all here. Clearing out the input, right? So I want to verify that this actually gets cleared out because right now, I don't think we test that. So we could even add it to this one, or we can make a brand new test where we can just say should clear out the existing input when a user adds the to-do item, okay? I find it better to have like really specific test cases. And even if you have a bunch of duplicate code and you can find ways to dry it up if you really want to, it's good to know exactly like what's broken about this app. Because if you did the same assertion here, which I'll show you in a second, like after you click on the to-do button here, we want to then get the input value. So I'm going to go ahead and get the input again. In fact, we might just be able to do like input.value here. Let's see. Input. Is there a get value? Let there be a value here. React test learner get the value of input. Let's do that. Some things I have to look up, like no shame. It's fine to look stuff up. You can't remember all this stuff. Get by display value. And I feel like React testing library sends you back DOM nodes. So like you should be able to do the value of the DOM nodes. Yeah, input.value they're doing right here. I don't know, maybe TypeScript just doesn't give me the IntelliSense I want, but I can say I expect input.value to equal the empty string. All right, so we added a new test. There's a TypeScript error here, but it should still work because sometimes TypeScript just complains about stuff. And if you know, let me know in the comments, like, why is this red? It's saying that value does not exist on HTML element, but it definitely works. right? I verify that it works. Now, one thing you should do when you're writing tests is go to your code and just break your code. Like, it's very easy to write poorly written tests that don't actually test real implementation. So after you write the test, go back and break your code. And you'll notice that right there, like this should have failed, but it didn't. So this test is bad. Now, why is this test not working the way I thought it would? I don't know. Maybe we need to await on some of these things. And let's try it again. There you have it. So I wasn't waiting properly. And what is this? Received all this stuff. Kind of weird. So if you look at the actual example here, like they fire an input change event on this, and then they expect it to be a certain amount. I'm not sure why we're getting some weird stuff here, but I'm going to go ahead and go back to here, and I'm going to go ahead and just clear that out. Make sure this test passes, which it does. So now we actually know that this test is good. And I think that helped highlight an issue with these tests. Like we should probably be awaiting on these tests because right now they're not actually doing exactly what you think they are. And the way that you can find out that this needed an await is you can hover over this, and in TypeScript, if this returns a promise, then you probably need to await on this, right? So that was my bad, missing that stuff out. So yeah, that's one way to test your stuff. I want to show you a different way though that's a little bit more concise. People say that you should test your components at this level, like I don't know, this is like a component/integration test level, where you're actually running everything in React, you're running everything in like JS DOM, and you're like simulating a real browser without the actual browser. It's like a more minimal browser, I guess. So another approach is, because I abstracted all this controller logic or all this logic in a custom hook, right? Because it all exists here, we could just test this hook in isolation if we want to. So I'm going to show you, let's go to this other test. I have a to-do hook test, and I'm going to go ahead and run that one. Hopefully it still passes. Use to-dos is not a function. So what did I do? I definitely broke some stuff. I think I'm still testing the wrong stuff. Let me import the right hook here, and let's run this. Okay, so now they're both passing. I don't know why we're getting this warning here. It's probably because I'm using Vite or something. I have to look into that. Or whatever I'm using here just doesn't seem like it works. It's just another thing. It's always another error you have to debug in your logs, and it's just a pain sometimes when you're dealing with programming. But if you look at this test, this is the exact same test basically. Should allow a user to add a new to-do item. But you'll see that we actually test the functions on the hook itself. So we say result current set text clean your room, result current add to do, and then we verify that after you run this code that the to-do's length is equal to 1. Okay, so it's kind of a different approach, and honestly this is probably the approach I would take because it seems like it's more of a real unit test. This, if you read through this code, this is not as concise as this code. It's literally testing the same thing. But this is a lot more verbose, in my opinion. And in a sense, it could be potentially more brittle because, like, you never know if your UX coworker decides that you need to change an ARIA label or change an ARIA text or something. So depending on what you set on these, like if you just, make sure you use test IDs and also use stuff that won't change that often. Like I wouldn't say write a test that goes through and tries to find a button that has the contents of add to do. Because now when someone actually decides that this needs to be add to do with an exclamation mark, you broke a bunch of tests. And maybe that's valuable, but honestly for me, like that's not valuable. I want to know that it doesn't matter what's in here. It doesn't matter what's in here. I rather just when this thing, whatever it is, when it's clicked, do the logic and verify that it does what it's supposed to do. And my argument is, especially if you're using TypeScript, you don't even need to test if this button is clicked. You just need to test that when you call this function, the logic of your custom hook does exactly what you're supposed to do. Because if you think about it, where is the highest chance of bugs being? Do you think it's in this view? Like me accidentally calling the wrong method? No, not with TypeScript, because it's going to warn you. It's going to say, hey, you're calling the wrong method, right? So it's a low chance that you're actually binding to the wrong method here. Maybe it's over here. Maybe you're binding to the wrong text value, or you forgot to actually, bind the input at all to the text value. Maybe that's a reasonable thing, but for the most part, like you're going to find that stuff real quick when you're doing some local testing, right? But type some stuff in here and I save it. Actually, I guess I don't even need the value here. Like, let's say I could just comment this out here. Like, you'll find out pretty quick that your stuff doesn't work, right? A simple little test in the UI will catch that bug. And once you have it set, it works again. So my argument is that most of the bugs are going to be coming from the actual logic. So this part, whatever this part happens to do. This is a really basic example, but I should say, now if your component becomes more complex, like this stuff is the stuff that's going to be bug food, right? So you want to test these functions. And in my opinion, using like a hook to verify those is one of the best ways. Like using this type of approach, there's a library called React Testing / React Hooks, or testing library / React Hooks. You get a render hook method and you get an act. You basically just render the hook, you can act on it and do some more stuff. But anyway, let's just go ahead and add like one more test like we did on this other one. So I'm going to go back to this to do. I'm going to add this it statement like so. And let's just kind of walk you through how you do this, right? So the first thing is we need to copy this because we need to render the hook and use our custom use to-dos hook, and we get the results. And that has like all the different methods, right? If I look at this, we have like add to-dos, delete to-dos, set text, and to-dos. And this could have like 10, 20 more methods and scope variables or whatever, depending on how complex your component is. So what are we going to do? We're going to see should clear out the existing input when a user adds the to-do item. So let's just go ahead and call this act here. You kind of have to wrap all your React specific code with an act so that the test knows like when to re-render, I believe, and like refresh your state. But we set the text, we add the to-do, but after acting, like we need to make sure we look at the actual text, result current text, to be empty string. Maybe to equal. I don't know. There's a difference, but I think it's a very small difference. Or one might be an alias for the other. But anyway, so we wrote a test, and like this is kind of doing the exact same test we did over here, where we verify that like the input is cleared out. But again, if you like compare the code from a glance, this is much harder to understand and read, right? And the argument is that this is giving you more value because like it's actually clicking buttons. I don't agree with that. I think that this is easier to understand and read, and it gives you the same amount of value. Because again, like I said, it's a low chance that you're just calling the wrong methods here, especially when using TypeScript. So anyway, we got a new test here. And again, when you make a test, go through and break your test. So I'm gonna go ahead and comment out that set text here. And now we have a failing test that says clean your room. And we know that this test is actually verifying the proper things. So that's all I kind of want to show you. Like, I know I didn't really walk you through a React testing library. This wasn't really a tutorial. This is more just me talking about testing. And this kind of leads me down the path of like that MVC stuff I was doing in a couple other videos, where it's like, can you actually make this cleaner? Can you get this to a point where you don't have to do all this extra stuff, right? Can you just do something like this, where when you call the hook, you get your methods add to do like this. And I guess we should get the text here. Right, so ultimately, like that's kind of like what I'm shooting for. It's like the most minimal approach to your test, the most minimal approach to your code. It's clear, it's concise, it's easy to read. And if you watch any of my other videos where I was doing like that MVC stuff, that's kind of like what I'm trying to do. But anyway, I hope you guys learned a little bit about jest testing and testing library. It seems like everyone uses it, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's great to write integration tests, but sometimes it could be kind of confusing and overwhelming to learn how to do that. I would recommend do TDD when you're coding. TDD is a great process that you can follow to really help you write cleaner code. And also TDD helps guide like what you're trying to do, because sometimes you're trying to implement some really crazy logic, and without a test like telling you you're doing it wrong before you start, it can be kind of challenging, where you just keep on saving the file. You go in, you test it in the UI, it's not working. You go back to your code, you make some changes, go to the UI, it's still not working, you broke something else, right? So having these tests that just kind of guide you along the way and just verify that you're not breaking existing functionality, and that also you are working towards the right path for the new functionality. Tests are important, right? I think unit testing and integration testing are super important, and TDD is a great process to verify that you kind of get those tests written along the way. Anyway, if you like this video, leave me a comment. Join my Discord if you want to talk to me directly, or get help from other people in my community who are willing to help you if you're stuck on React or programming in general. And like always, have a good day and happy coding.